Hey guys, Alex here. So now that we've covered some basic mid-game principles, today we would like to talk about swindles. So swindles are one of the most important maneuver you can have in the game to actually gain tempo as well. So there are multiple types of swindles, and today I'm going to introduce you some types of swindles. So the most basic form of swindles would actually come in the end game, and the more advanced swindles will actually come in the mid game. So today we're going to be covering a little bit more on end game swindles, and then in the next couple of episodes I like to cover mid game swindles. Hey, what's up guys? So today we're going to be talking about introduction to swindles. So swindles are basically a special type of maneuver that allows you to make consecutive moves in the same area, essentially. So typically it's especially useful for a player playing black who is trying to actually overcome parity. And potentially you could also use it as white if you can try to make consecutive moves within an even region. So there are many different types of swindles, and today we're going to be covering three types, probably three of the more common ones on that note. And over here in the background, you can see that this is Tokyo. This is essentially the 10th episode that I'm actually featuring different cities that the World Othello Championships have been held. So the first one being held in Tokyo, and then of course this is the 11th one essentially. So every 10 years, with the year ending with a 6, the World Othello Championship actually returns to Japan. And of course, initially it was held in Tokyo, and subsequently it was moved to its city of origin, which is Mito, which is also in Japan, probably just about a few hours train ride away from away from Tokyo. So let us move on to the topics for today. We're going to be covering forced swindle, a creeping swindle, and a pocket swindle. So in a game where both players does not actually create a pass-in move for each one of them, usually an end game probably results in this situation. So if you can see, the top left is essentially a 2-square even region, the top right is also an even region, and the bottom right is also a 2-square even region. And right now, by virtue of the rules of the game, it's actually black's turn to play. And of course, parity tells us that we should always start with an odd region. But none of these are essentially odd regions, so there is theoretically no way that black can actually overcome parity. At least not apparently. So the only way that black can actually overcome parity over here is to create a thing called a forced swindle. So over here, if black were to just start off with the top right, which is a 4-square even region, if black goes G1, white simply just goes to H1 and establishes the corner. Black goes G2 and white goes H2, and that would essentially mean that parity is sealed. And of course, if black goes to G2 and white goes to H1, essentially parity is also sealed. So the only way to actually overcome parity over here, and of course if black were to go H8 here, white simply just captures H7 and parity is still sealed. So the only way that black can actually overcome parity is to play B2, which is an X square. So usually we don't really advocate playing the X square, but for the case of actually trying to get a swindle, this X square would be extremely critical to play. So if black were to play B2, you would then realize that the top right, which is still an even region, is not really playable by white, because if white plays either of the X squares or C squares, white is essentially giving away the corner immediately. And white would lose parity in that region. And of course, white would then be forced to continue with A1 over here, since black has fed the corner to white. So when white captures the corner over here, essentially white forms this diagonal control, which is the lead diagonal across. However, when black has this wedge access to the corner of H8, by feeding that X square and allowing white to capture the corner and forming this continuous row, black can essentially play H8 without having to flip any of the discs along the diagonal, which was originally seen in that previous position, whereby if black were to play H8, white would be able to play H7. But in this case, once black plays H8, you realize there is no way that white can actually jump into H7. So this essentially is a forced swindle. By feeding that, you force white to actually capture that corner, form that continuous row whereby black has that access to the corner, and black essentially is able to play that clean move across. And when white plays H2, for example, black would then be able to just capture H7 with a pass move and followed by capturing H1 with a pass move again and one more move to G1, and black would then essentially win the game with Swindle. So if we take a look at the previous position again, this would essentially be a forced swindle, and if black were to start off with H8 instead and allow white to jump into H7, then feeding B2 would then be meaningless afterwards. So white captures A1, and then you realize that no matter what black does, black is unable to win the game. So that is essentially the forced swindle, which is highly important to take note. So when you have a corner access to an even region and you realize that you need the parity, it's better not to grab the corner first, but to see whether there is a way to actually force a swindle across. So that's a quick tip from me, and let's move on to the second type of swindle. So now let's talk about the creeping swindle. So for this, I would actually refer to the Othello Quest app, and we'll go right into one of the endgame puzzles. So you just go to study in the front interface, and then we'll select 6 empty squares, part 1 puzzle. We'll just cycle through to puzzle 22 for this case. Okay, so let's take a look. Right now it's black's turn to play. We have 29 discs. So right now on the board, there are even regions all around, the top left, the top right, the bottom right as well. So if we were to actually choose a place to play for black, the top left is not accessible, so it's either the top right or the bottom right. So if we were to play either one of these squares, black would play probably to the corner and white would follow. So the logical way is to actually make a count usually to just verify your options. You probably wouldn't want to play the C square and give up the corner and give up that stable row of discs, but rather to capture the corner if you were to choose between these two. So you could almost immediately eliminate the C square here at H7. So you'll probably shortlist this move as 1, and you could probably count that line. Similarly over here, you probably wouldn't want to play the C square move and give up the corner and the entire stable disc over here on the right and also to the top. So if you just consider between these two moves, you would probably prefer the corner. So let us now compare this corner and H1 corner. So which corner would make more sense? So this comes to the point about creeping swindle. So you notice that this entire 7th row are actually white discs. So given that this entire 7th row are white discs, a potential swindle would be to actually capture the corner here to H1, and then white would jump in for parity, and then when you jump right down over here to H7, that essentially allows you to flip disc on the diagonal line and also the vertical line, but none on the horizontal line. That does not create any move for white to respond. So in essence, white would then be forced to capture the corner. You can jump in over here to A2 and then create that disc back and flip down with the final move with that swindle. So let us see it in action. So black starts off with this and white responds over here. You go for that swindle, which is basically against this entire continuous 7th row. So this, I call it a creeping swindle because it's somewhat creeping along the edges and also trying to make consecutive moves with a C square followed by a corner. and then of course white captures that corner, and you don't have a legal move here. You want to create that access back for that corner, so you jump in over here. And of course, because of that swindle that you did earlier, the final move is now yours to actually win the game. So let us just go back to that position, to that original position, and let's consider what happens if we did take h8. So if we took h8, yes, naturally white would respond with h7 to close out that even region for parity. And then you would then only have that option to h1. And white would then go in for parity, jump down over here to take the edge, and then when you play this, you realize even though you do have parity to the top left, you actually lose out in terms of the game and the total number of discs. So, yep, that is essentially the creeping swindle, that maneuver from the corner, and playing this quiet move over here on the edge. So let us now talk about the third type of swindle that I'd like to share with you today, which is the pocket swindle. So essentially, I'm picking up the 136 puzzle of the 2 empty squares within Othello quest. It did take some time to cycle through the puzzles to actually look for this. So I call it a pocket swindle because it basically creates that pocket of space and allows you to play 2 moves consecutively. So I think, yeah. So the main point in the end game is to actually look out for moves that actually still continue to actually retain mobility and try to allow you to make more moves consecutively instead of just trying to think of flipping more discs. So let's take a look at this puzzle. It's now white's turn to play, and basically you have 2 options. So this is a very basic puzzle. If you do play G7, black would be able to play G8 in response, and you then lose parity. And given that your discount is much lower right now compared to black, you'll probably lose. So the only way is to actually play G8 first and form that swindle, because this entire C line from the A2 disc over here down to the F7 disc is all a straight diagonal row of actually black's discs. So given that that is entirely black, white is able to actually play into G8 first and flip these 4 discs along the horizontal row and result in a pass, basically. So that is essentially the definition of a swindle. And of course, white would then be able to continue to play to G7 and flip another 7 discs in 3 different directions to end off the game. So if you just do a counting exercise, you would then have 24 plus 1 plus these 4, that would be plus 5, so that's 29, plus this disc that you just placed is 30, and then of course the 7 discs, so you would expect the final result to be 37. So it is a good habit to actually cultivate, to actually count the lines, as long as you have the luxury of time. If not, if it's very clear-cut between the 2 choices, always go for the move that is better for sure, if it's obvious, of course. If not, just count it out before you play it. So let's just play out this sequence. So white goes here, there's a pass of move, and you can then follow up consecutively. And yeah, basically win the game. So I definitely do encourage all of you to actually go on to Othello Quest, go to the study menu, and just take on some of those exercises as practice for your end game. So endgame does have fixed sequences, but some sequences may entail or require you to actually make such special maneuvers like swindles, or some special maneuvers to actually try to close off the game, or if not, just really pure hard counting of the different trees of the final variations that you can play. So of course, there are different types of swindles as well in the mid-game, which is generally harder to spot than perhaps the end game. So in the next couple of episodes, my focus will be on mid-game maneuvers, mid-game swindles.